Hi, my name's Itali, and in this video I'll be doing a commission for Harbinger. Now, as usual, this is a time-lapse video, so it does contain fast-moving and flashing images. So Harbinger asked me to design them a forest dragon, and there were some references provided as inspiration for this dragon, which was the hybrid dragon from the game Day of Dragons and a forest dragon from Warhammer's, I think it was the Total War video game. So I was just combining some of those elements and mixing in some new features, but basically what we wanted was a double-winged forest dragon. So I was instructed to add whatever extra elements I thought would make it look more foresty. Now, I did spend quite a bit of time on this sketch. I actually spent 2 hours on this sketch, and this whole image took me 13 hours. So that's a pretty decent chunk of time spent just on the sketch. But because the design was a new design and I had to think about where I was going to place things and what would look foresty as I was creating the dragon, and because it has a dual pair of wings and still 4 legs and a dual set of antlers, it did take a long time to refine these elements. So at the moment, this is the first staging the rough sketches, and then I'll do a more refined sketch, and then we change the pose slightly again later. So that's why it took me so much time to do this sketch. Normally a sketch won't take me 2 hours. A sketch itself will take me about an hour, depending on what it is. And if I do line art, that's what usually takes me 2 hours, which is why I don't normally do line art, because with my style of coloring, it's not really necessary, as I will just be coloring over all these lines in the painting process of this drawing. Now, Harbinger did ask that the dragon be in a proud pose, and I did sort of try to make it look proud, but I was basing its body shape on the dragon from the Warhammer game, and their body shape was kind of low and long like a lizard, and it didn't look like its head could be lifted very high, which is why I initially did this pose. But later on, to make it look like prouder, we did change the body shape a bit so that its head would sit more upright and its neck straight up rather than out long ways, so it can sort of, I guess, look down on people and be more elegant as it walks. So right now you see me doing this more crouched over pose, I guess, but we are going to make that neck and head in a completely different position later on. It's just part of the design process, is making sure that I'm doing what the commissioner wants. It is a bit of a shame that I didn't pick up on this in the early starts of the sketches, because as you can see, I spent a bit of time doing this head and neck as it is, and then had to redo it, which did waste a little bit of time. But really I should have made sure my client was happy when I finished this sketch, rather than just sort of pushing forward and coloring it. I do often give people opportunities to change things, but I think sometimes people are a little bit afraid to say they don't like something. I did bring this up in my last commission video, that people are a bit reluctant to tell me, oh, I'd like it a different way, please. Probably because they know how long I've spent on, it's like how much time has been spent on something. But at the end of the day, this isn't a drawing for me, it's a drawing for you. So feel free to tell me, especially in the early stages, if you think something doesn't feel right, just say, hey, can I have it another way? I'm not going to get upset. It will take a bit of extra time, but at the end of the day, if it's going to make you happier and make the picture better, then that's what should be done. Now, I did struggle a little bit with these wings as usual, but I do feel like I'm slowly getting a better understanding of wings, and I feel like in this picture with the double wings, I did come to a decision on how to place them a bit earlier than what I normally would, and I was quite happy with how sort of natural the wings looked. I'm still not 100% happy with my wing anatomy, but it's getting there slowly. I think I just have to draw more, and I guess because this picture had a double wing design, it meant I got to draw them twice, and they're in different poses too. And I like how the claws sort of hook back like that. I like that hook back claw look. So it was kind of a bit of a challenge, but every time I draw them, I get better at them. So it was a good challenge. Another challenge was trying to figure out how the second pair of antlers would go. This is another sort of weak point of mine. I'm not very good at figuring out how the opposite horn or antlers should go. It's another thing I should practice more. I was happy with how this turned out in the end, but you can see me sort of struggling with how this should look from behind the forefront pair of antlers. So I probably spent a bit too much time trying to get these right, but again, as said, I was happy in the end with how they looked, so it was worth spending the time trying to get them right. I'm now setting my wings into poses. For some reason, I do this weird thing where I draw the claws outstretched and then I use the transform tool to bend them into the shape they should be. And then I erase it and just draw it by hand anyway. So I don't know, it's just part of my process is trying to figure out how a wing would fold more naturally. I use my hand as reference a fair bit, and I use bats' wings as reference a fair bit. So it again took me a bit of time, and I'm actually doing this wing on a separate layer. So I copied the original layer and then erased away and redid the wing, because I'm basically doing a rough sketch again over a refined sketch, and I didn't want to mess up the drawing below it, but I still wanted the freedom to sketch out the wings again and make sure I got them right, which is why I was using a second layer for this. And then after I've refined the wings back down again, then I combine the layers together and they become one finished refined sketch. And then now that I've finished with the refined sketches and then I'm about to show Harbinger, I add this little guy for scale, and after showing him the sketch and them being happy with it, then I continued on to do a rough background so I could show them the idea for the background and a basic idea of what that's going to look like before I spend hours doing the full background. So this is the rough background. I was actually quite pleased with how the first stages of this background went, and I especially like the far off trees and stuff that I did in the end. And I was a bit worried about doing this big old sort of fantasy tree in the background, because I've always sort of struggled with things in the distance, but I feel like with this picture I finally started to get the hang of that kind of thing. And I do like the tree's a bit small at the moment, but I do make it bigger, and I do feel like it does look like it's a long way in the distance and that it is truly massive, which is what I was going for and what I was worried about. So I was pleased with how this tree came out. Once I finished with the rough background, I then moved on to adding the colors to the dragon. Pretty much had free reign for this, it's just that it had to be forest looking, so of course we used greens and browns. And I did do a similar sort of theme to the Warhammer dragon, but I kind of just remembered what it looks like and then did my own design and patterns. It's fairly plain in its design colors, I guess, but because it's covered in spikes, I didn't want to have too many the designs or spots or stripes on it, as it already had things breaking up its shape. And I have learnt that adding patterns to things basically makes it impossible for you to see any kind of muscle structure or design, which is what they're for. So like, you know, zebra stripes and leopard spots, they're all designed to break up the shape of a creature and make it hard to see what you're looking at. So adding those kinds of patterns to something you've just spent hours shading means that you can no longer see those hours of shading. So I guess that's kind of a selfish motivation of mine not to put those markings on the dragon. But because it has spikes all over its body as well, I thought it would just be too busy if I added those designs on anyway, as we have got the brown spikes breaking up the colors on the dragon. So it's at this point in the process that Harbinger did remind me that they wanted a proud pose rather than, I guess, this leaning over pose. So you can see now I'm redrawing the front of the dragon. I'm moving its legs to be straighter and its head to be taller, or its neck to be straight up rather than leaning down, and just giving it a small tilt to the head so it's sort of still looking down. And I did have to sort of redraw all of the parts around the head and neck, a little bit around the shoulders, and I did shift those front legs as well. It didn't take too long to do this, and originally the rough redo took like 8 minutes, so I had it to them fairly quickly, but then after I'd done those parts, I did have to redraw quite a bit of it. So I know I probably spent an extra half an hour redoing this refined sketch and moving the color, because I had already done the flat colors too, so that had to be shifted into a new position. But it wasn't too much effort, and at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, if that's what you want, then that's what I'll do, and it kind of looks better because of it. So if our powers combine, we can make better drawings. Well, finally up to what I call the business end of the drawing. So I finished with all the sketching and the flat colors and the rough background. Now it's time to actually shade this bad boy. Now, as you can see, I've made the layer grayscale because I do now find it easier to shade in grayscale and then have the colors added as a color layer before combining them together and doing some final touch-ups at the end. So at the moment, I'm actually just removing these wings from the layer that's the body of the dragon, just because I find it easier to paint them separately in the beginning. Because there's so many overlapping parts, it does make it a bit hard for me to shade like the muscle structure and stuff if I've then got to dodge around the bones of the wings coming across the tail and that kind of thing. And yeah, making sure that the antlers are nice and neat when they're over top of the wings is also a bit difficult, which is why I separated the two layers and shaded them separately until I was happy enough with the amount of definition I'd done, and then I joined the two layers back together. So at the moment, I'm just slowly working my way through the dragon. I started by turning the color layer grayscale, then I added a multiply layer over the top for where the basic shadows would be cast, and I merge that down, and then I get my smudge tool out and I blur in those shadows a bit, and then I just start teardropping the different colors, or so different shades, there's no colors here yet, and just work my way over top of the dragon, defining bit by bit. So you can see I'm adding like the lines and the horns and slowly defining the shape of the dragon. It did take quite a long time to do this. As mentioned, it had spikes. It's got a lot of spikes on its head, and it's got two sets of antlers, and I did want to make sure the head was decently detailed, as they are generally, the head is generally the focal point of the picture. So I spent quite a lot of time just on the head alone, and a bit of time at the front of the dragon, like where the shoulders are and the chest. And I actually spent the least amount of time on the wings, as the wings, the sketch was pretty solid on them. they didn't have a lot of colors or different sort of shapes going on there, so I could shade it fairly broadly. And because most of it's just membrane stretched along the bony forms of the, I guess, the fingers of the wing, there wasn't a lot of muscle definition I had to do, so the wings actually take me the most amount of time to draw and the least amount of time to shade. So you'll see most of my focus will be around the front of the dragon, and then I spend far less time as I go down the tail of the dragon, as it just requires less definition. So I'm just gonna let you watch this for now. I don't really have much else to say about the shading process, and then I'll just chime back in when I have something more to talk about. Oh, I should also say that you will periodically see me turning on the color layer and moving the colors around on the separate color layer. This is just so I can define the shadows underneath more, as I'm not 100% sure on the colors yet. I start to add in some different tones of green and brown to the dragon, as you can see here. And when I do that, I need to see if I need to change the shading underneath to better match the colors that I'm after. So you will see me sort of flicking between the color layer after I've done quite a bit of shading on the dragon, and then I'll turn the color layer on and just see how it looks and maybe move around some colors. But I won't truly work on the color layer properly until the whole dragon is shaded, in which I do a sort of final pass on the color layer, then combine it, and then continue to shade with them combined, adding in some surrounding colors and finishing the color process of the dragon. Now this is a mistake I often make, which is I draw the pattern straight onto the shading layer, and then when I go to shade it, I just find it too difficult to shade around the pattern, and the pattern needs to have shading too. So generally I just end up getting rid of the pattern as I shade, and then I'll add it back on top of the shading layer as a separate layer so that I can shade the different patterns separately to the actual body of, or in this case the wings of the dragon, and make them follow the shaded layer a bit better than what I did originally. So yeah, you can see here I'm just painting over this pattern and I'm just going to add it back on afterwards, as it's way easier to do that rather than try and paint around the pattern or paint with the pattern in the shading layer. It's just, I just find it too hard to do. Now I've pretty much finished with the shading of the dragon, I start to make my final color adjustments to the color layer before combining it together. So you see here I'll be adding the colors to the pattern on the wings, and then I start mixing in just a couple of different tones here and there. I add a bit of yellow and a bit of blue just to add some variation to the dragon and some interest, as I do find if you just shade the whole thing one boring tone of green, it's not very interesting. And in any case, there would be light reflected off the grass or the trees or the sky that affect the color of the dragon. So even if your dragon is one solid color of green or something, it will still appear to be different colors because of the light reflecting around the creature. Now I'm happy with how the dragon is. I start to do the background. This background was a little bit of a mammoth effort for me. It has lots of trees in it, which I'm still not terribly good at, and I wanted to make the grass or ground a little bit more interesting than I usually do. So I was mixing in lots of colors. I was trying to get the background distant color right, so like adding lots of this grey blue into the trees in the background to make them look more distant. And I did spend too long trying to get the leaves right again. It's still something I struggle with. I really just need to find time to practice trees and leaves, I think, or just backgrounds in general. I did find a bit of time this week to do it, so maybe soon you'll see some of my practice backgrounds. But I was overall happy with how this turned out, especially with how the far off background stuff turned out, like this big tree and the row of trees that are in front of it, and the grass, the ground, I thought still looked interesting and better than some of my other stuff. But the very front trees, I spent a long time on them, and they look okay, but they're not fantastic. Hopefully one day I'll be able to do trees better than how I'm currently doing them, but at this stage this is as good as I can do trees. So I hope you like it, Harbinger, but I tried my best on the trees, so I hope they're not too disappointing to you. So I'm now heading into the final adjustment stages of this drawing. I'm adding in some darker shadows being cast by the dragon, and I'll be doing some color adjustments and that kind of thing. I did realize I had forgotten a couple of things I'd been asked for. One was a little person standing on the antlers as an alternative file or picture for this, so we're going to do one with and one without. I was also meant to put some moss and stuff hanging from the antlers. Now, unfortunately, I started to have a problem with my tablet, and those of you who've watched a lot of my videos may recognize the problem. It's when my tablet starts to get too full, and it was quite full at this stage because this was a very large file, and I'd done nearly 13 hours of recording, plus I was still doing my Day of Dragons job, which required me to do basically daily avatars and record those. So I had a lot of recordings on there, and my app just decided it didn't really want to work properly anymore. It wasn't as bad as some of the problems I've had in the past. I could still use it. It would just constantly come up with this pop-up that said that the app wasn't working and did I want to wait or close the program. But the app was actually still working, so I just click wait and then I continue working, but it would just keep popping up, and you can see it's doing it now. So you'll just see that white box flick up at the bottom of the screen basically constantly now. If I close the program, the pop-up would still come up even though the program was closed. So I'd actually have to click close app and then reload everything, and then after a while it would just end up doing the same thing. So unfortunately I couldn't really record a lot more after this, so I ended up not being able to record the additions that I'd forgotten about. So you can see now the moss on the horns has just suddenly appeared, and the person will just suddenly appear as well. My tablet just couldn't handle it. Unfortunately, it's just, I'm not sure if it's the actual tablet itself or if it's the art program. I super love Artflow. It's just simple and easy to use. It's got everything I want, but it's not really being supported by the developer of the app anymore. I don't think there's been an update in ages. I've sent them messages about how I could fix some of the issues that I'm having, but they just never responded. So either I'm going to have to eventually start using another app, which I really don't want to do, or if it is indeed my tablet just being old and not being able to handle this kind of stuff anymore, then I might have to bite the bullet and upgrade. But this is a Samsung S7, so it's not that old, and it's been really good with everything else, so I feel like it is just the app, but I guess I'll have to wait and see. Well, here it is. Here's the finished picture. Thanks so much, Harbinger, for commissioning me. It was mostly an enjoyable process until the end when my program stopped working. Thanks everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I do have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!